we'll kick it off with our first demo. It's from the Living and Working with Robots team, specifically Dr. Peter Stone of the Department of Computer Science and Emily Norman of the Department of Communication Studies. They'll present Living and Competing with Robots, RoboCup as an Object of Social Science Study. So let's give it up for Peter and Emily, please.
Thanks, Ken. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so Ken mentioned interdisciplinary. This is definitely an interdisciplinary project. I'm from computer science. I've been involved in something called RoboCup for the past 25, almost 30 years. But this talk is not about RoboCup. It's the main presenter is going to be Emily, talking about studying RoboCup from a social science perspective. And so I'm going to just try to really quickly, in like 3 to 5 minutes, tell you what RoboCup is. And then I'm going to get off the stage and turn it over to Emily, who's going to tell you about her dissertation research on using RoboCup as an object of study, which I think is fascinating. So what is RoboCup? It started as a soccer challenge. The grand challenge of RoboCup is simply stated, creating humanoid robots that can beat the World Cup champions, the best soccer players, human soccer players on a real field by the year 2050. So sort of akin to Deep Blue beating Garry Kasparov or AlphaGo beating Lisa Dahl, similar results in other domains, trying to do it in soccer, a physical domain. It's been going on for, like I said, 25 or 30 years. There's a bunch of different leagues at RoboCup. There's an international competition every year that I've participated in every year since, I think, 1997. Different sort of assumptions based on whether you're in simulation or using real robots, whether they're wheeled robots, whether everybody has the same robot or you're building the robots. Just to give you a sense of what it looked like at the beginning, this is from 1997 or 1998, when it was uncommon for roboticists even to have robots. People would work on one part of the problem. Putting it together was a big challenge. And so it was nice that these robots would actually sense, decide, and act. They weren't great. They fell over. But when they did, they got up. They ran into walls. Sometimes they scored goals, like you'll see here. There wasn't much opposition from the goalie there. But the ball went in the net. Sometimes the robot caught fire that year, which was discouraging. But if you fast forward, and this is still far in the past, but about 10 years after that, you'll see big changes. The robots are starting to be individually much more capable. They're starting to pass as teammates. You'll see some very quick motion in the small-size league here. It was the beginning of the humanoid league then, so that year there was just a penalty shot competition. But there was, again, some goals scored and some saves made, like this one here. Or maybe it was not a save, it was a try. So those are the kinds of things. Our team here at UT Austin has won one of the competitions many times, the Simulation League. So this was, a competition where where the robots are actually simulated. It's 11 on 11, but it's like a video game, but you have to write AI controllers for the robots. I won't show you too much of this. And then we are actually at the point where every year people play against the robots. So here's me and some of the other trustees of RoboCup playing against the champions of the middle-sized league. This is from many years ago now at this point, I think 10 years ago. But you'll see here that aging amateur soccer players are still able to beat the robots. And so every year it gets a little harder, maybe because we're getting older, but one way or another, we're getting to the point where you can put robots and people on the field together. There's a lot of advances from a research perspective. That's really the point of this. Lots of publications, science and technology. It also goes well beyond soccer. Oh, I should say what one of the competitions looks like these days is with these now humanoid robots. We actually won this competition several years ago. Our robots were the ones with their arms behind their back here. You have to remember they're fully autonomous, no remote control. We beat a team from the University of Bremen in the finals. Here, I'll let you just see the first goal in this one. When we came back from this competition as the world champions, they lit the tower orange for us, which we were, they usually only do for the football team. So we were happy about that. Here you see our robot going in on a breakaway. We still compete with these robots, and we actually won a trophy last year with these robots with a joint team with my former student who's now at the University of Wisconsin. And so Emily will be studying the team that works on this as well. just to close out before I turn it over to Emily, RoboCup is now much beyond soccer. There's an educational component of it, which is RoboCup Junior, disaster rescue, getting robots to try to find victims after an earthquake or simulated earthquake. There's a RoboCup Industrial where you're trying to get robots to do sort of industrial tasks, put components together, work on logistics. And we also participate here, and Emily will be studying this as well. We have a team that participates in RoboCup at Home, which is about general purpose service robots. And I'll just show you one more video. We don't have the sound working, but this is from last year's competition. It gives you sort of a sense of what the robots have to do in RoboCup at Home. This is actually talking out loud, so if I had the sound, you'd hear the robot saying, please have a seat in the armchair. This is sort of acting as a party host. Here it's having to set the table, pick up dishes and put it on the table. Here it's putting away groceries. And there's lots of people around. This is back in our labs practicing the set table task, and this is in one of the competitions where everybody has the same physical robot, but they have to do sort of general purpose service tasks. So that's it. I'm going to get off the stage here and turn it over to Emily, because really this project is about studying RoboCup, but now you have a little bit of context. So take it away, Emily.
Well, I'll go ahead and start off just by saying thank you, everyone, for being here. The Good Systems Symposium is something I look forward to every year. I'm very passionate about interdisciplinary research. It's hard to do, it's difficult, but it's extremely rewarding when it works and we can really bring together people who are also passionate about it and want to solve some of these complex problems. So my name is Emily Norman. You might also see Emily Economy. I got married over the winter break, and now I'm taking my chance to capitalize on my husband's really awesome last name. I am a communication studies student in the Department of Communications. I'm getting my Ph.D., and will graduate hopefully in about a year. So starting to work on my dissertation, of course, about RoboCup. My research falls kind of at the intersections of three different categories. The first one being organizational communication and technology, which is something that our communication studies department specializes in here. And also at the intersections of human-robot interaction, I've done some research on perceived safety in human-robot encounters, especially those indoors sort of crossing scenarios in which people may or may not expect a robot to be coming. And so as you can imagine, those types of scenarios will certainly increase as we go further into the future. And last is the study of science teams and how they collaborate together. So as you might imagine, the RoboCup study sort of falls into each of these three categories in one way or another. So I'm very excited to kind of be able to combine everything together and look at some really awesome teams that are promoting AI and technology research, especially here at the University of Texas. Okay, we're restarting the laptop. I'll just go ahead and keep going if that's okay with everyone. Thanks to me for practicing pretty well. So I'll go ahead and start by telling you a little bit about qualitative research and why I decided to do qualitative research for this particular project. So when we think about qualitative research, what we're thinking about is systematic study that is particularly human-centered, right? So we're thinking about things that are looking at human-centered data, which often encompasses things like research interviews, focus groups, ethnographic study, if you're familiar with anthropological research. And so when we approach these things systematically, typically what that looks like is taking these transcripts from these different types of data collection methods and applying sort of a coding scheme to them oftentimes, depending on what type of investigation you might be doing. This could look a little bit different based on the method. But the really awesome thing about it is that we can really get a sense of what are people saying about these particular things and why does it matter to them, right? So we think about things like generating questions, expanding on perhaps quantitative research, or even expanding on problems that might be new or novel that we need to know more about. And so that's a huge benefit of doing qualitative research. Another reason is, why RoboCup? Why RoboCup for social science study? Why is it important for our community? And one of the things is, just like Peter mentioned, one of their goals is to advance AI and robotics research, right? We'll talk about that a little bit more and bring in sort of an ethics sort of insight into that here in a little bit. But from an organizational perspective, RoboCup's really interesting because you have these teams who are sort of dispersed across the university. They often work late into the night, sometimes separately, sometimes together. They are characterized by some things that we would call postmodern traits of teams. So sort of this idea that teams can be fragmented and, non-hierarchical in a lot of ways. And it's just a unique problem, right? This type of grand challenge is not something that you see every day. And so those are some of the things that make this type of research interesting. So during my study, I'll first tell you a little bit about the type of data I'll be collecting, and then we'll look at a timeline. So I primarily would like to focus on interviews and focus groups for transcript-style data, where I'll be analyzing that using a grounded theory approach. So hopefully what can come out of this is new theory about how teams like this work sort of in the wild, if you will, but also how the team members understand their collaboration together. How can we improve even the performance of these teams as we move into the future? And then, of course, observational field notes, which is where you find the really fun stuff. How are they sort of interacting on a day-to-day basis? What are some of the quirks about these teams? And the stuff that makes for really good stories. And I'll be researching 3 different types of teams within our UT Austin RoboCup sort of environment. And that's the humanoid team, which you'll see the booster robotics humanoid here at the top. The standard platform soccer league, which is the Now robot here in the middle. Peter showed us a video of those tiny robots. And then the RoboCup at Home league, which is another standardized platform robot coming from Toyota. So thinking about the timeline for this research, I'm splitting it into 3 phases. We have the first phase, which will occur before the competition, so understanding how teams are preparing for competing. Things like immersing myself within the team will sort of happen at that time, building relationships, walking folks through the IRB-informed consent process so that they understand that their risk and what the study involves. The second phase of the competition will be, I'll actually get to attend RoboCup, which I'm super excited about if all goes well. And that will be a really unique opportunity to see how a lot of this preparation actually plays out in practice. And there's also some really unique things about attending the competition that, from what I understand, you just have to experience to understand it. And last will be post-competition, which will occur sort of after July. This will be some debriefing about the competition, how it went, reflection from the teams, and also maybe what we could do better next year. So let's talk about the juicy stuff now. What are some of the potential findings that might occur as a result of this study? So in organizational communication, we have a lot of research about knowledge transfer, how knowledge transfer happens in teams. Sometimes it might occur as a result of, a particularly loquacious member who shares a lot of information and, eventually that information runs out as they've shared a lot, and then other people have a chance to take over. When organizations go through change, knowledge transfer tends to be rather difficult. You may have somebody who is very excited about knowledge transfer, and as a result, it may not sort of come down the line of people who need to know about it very well. There's all kinds of things that can complicate this process, but what's interesting about the RoboCup teams is that these teams change a lot. From year to year, you see people sort of cycling in and out. Grad students graduate, they take jobs, they go to different universities. Undergrads might find that they really like it at first, and then maybe their interests change. There's just a lot of dynamic processes that happen on these teams, so I'm interested to see what are the types of things that people do to pass on advice, what are the types of things people do to document their code that might work really well or not so well, and there's some knowledge that just can't be shared. I've heard team members already talk about the fact that with the competition, it's really difficult, but it makes you a better roboticist, and you gain scars as a result. So I'm curious to see what is this knowledge that is sort of implicit and tacit in a lot of ways, and how do people sort of understand that and learn how to characterize it. So the next thing is the role of goals in these teams. We characterize these types of teams in the organizational research as contending action teams. There's a ton of research out there on action teams, which look a lot more like these sort of teams that come together and meet very quickly, typically under high pressure situations. So you might think of like EMTs, sort of these first responder type settings, even emergency surgical teams. RoboCup's a little bit different, right? It may not be that life-threatening in the instance that they're coming together to meet, but they have 3 characteristics that's really important. They have a dynamic adversary, so things are changing rather rapidly with who they're going up against. They have a set of objective rules that they must abide by in order to evaluate their success, so it's not necessarily something that's always identified as subjective success. And then they also have to improvise. There's a great story that I've heard from last year's competition in which they were performing a grocery task and all of a sudden the robot stopped working. They check, ROS, and something was happening where there was sort of these phantom obstacles sort of popping up, and they tried to fix this issue, tried to figure out what was going on, and turns out that prior to setting up the robot for that particular competition, someone had touched the LiDAR sensor and there was a fingerprint on the LiDAR sensor. But it took some time to figure that out. So things like that, these team members learn from and try to do better next time. So the way that goals function in these teams is very important. You'll also see that team members will sort of work on problems on their own. They'll set goals during team meetings, work on them for a week or 2 or so, and then come back and report on those goals. So time is certainly something that's important here as well, which we know is very critical when we're identifying and defining what a goal is. Time is a big factor in that. And then last, of course, what I would imagine is definitely important to our good systems crowd here is what are the ethical implications of this type of work? And one of the things that we talk about a lot that I see in technology research especially is transparency about algorithms, transparency about the system, the technology itself. But from our perspective, especially in organizational communication, one thing we think about is, well, if there's bias in the technology, as many of us know, it has to come from somewhere, right? It has to come from the teams. So not only do we need transparency into technology itself, but also into the teams that program technology. And so in this setting, we think of things like research, AI research, robotics research that's coming out. A lot of these competitions are designed around tasks that we could see robots actually doing in the future. For instance, helping someone unload groceries, helping someone make a bowl of cereal, things like this, right? I think some of the tricky things that happen is that because it's a competition, people do things quickly and people do things to get points. So you see, folks joining committees, and when they make the rules, and they're competing on the teams, we have to think about, okay, has this turned into an idea where this is a competition and we just need to win, or are we still focusing on the research aspect and how we might help people in the future? So I think there's some interesting sort of points that will come out as we go. I'm really curious to learn about the committee election process that happens at RoboCup and see how that goes amongst students and faculty. And then just to put this in a broader conversation with technological advancement, I just saw an article written by a journalistic outlet yesterday that was talking about the fact that if the US doesn't do certain things, we're going to lose the robotics race, right? So what does competition mean historically, but what does it also mean in these smaller settings that have these goals to inform how history gets played out in the future? Right? So often when we talk about robotics, we are talking about the future. There are things robots do very well in certain contexts, but there are also things that we're still trying to figure out, are they doable? Is a robot appropriate and applicable in this particular situation? And what does that look like when we're talking about benefiting humans? So we talked a little bit about why qualitative research, why RoboCup. I gave you sort of an intro to my 3-phase design, starting before, during, and after the competition, performing interviews, focus groups, and observations. And last, I told you a little bit about what I think I might find, some information about knowledge transfer, about goals on these contending action teams, and of course, some transparency into these teams, as well as the ethics of competition. So I want to thank you so much for having me here today. Again, it's always a pleasure to present at the Good Systems Symposium, and I'll see you at RoboCup 2025. I think we can open it up for maybe a question or two. Yeah.
Thanks. That was very interesting. I just wonder whether you can expand a little bit on the ethics of competition, because you're putting it in the context of RoboCup, which is completely right. But many of us are worried about the competition between the U.S. and China, where there's a lot more at stake, but maybe some of your lessons apply there. And we probably ought to be cooperating, and what we're doing is competing. Just see if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, you know, I'm not gonna necessarily say that I'm an expert in like geopolitical relationships for sure, but I think what's important with competition is that honestly, I think that's the really challenging thing about robotics, right? It is a competition in a lot of ways, especially when we think about what we want in terms of who stands where. Ultimately, I think the best way to approach robots is how they can support people, though. And sometimes if that means not being the best competitor, maybe that's the right outcome. Again, this is not necessarily something I'm an expert in yet, but I'm hoping that, yeah, absolutely, some of these findings about competition in this particular context might be expandable, but definitely something to think about and to work on, yeah. Yeah, of course. Thanks, Peter.
So, Craig, thanks for the question. So actually, RoboCup is a competition, but actually, I think it is more cooperative. So it's I'm on the board of trustees, and we've deliberately not had prize money, or and we encourage people to share their source code, and the teams do build off of each other from year to year. Basically, the reward for winning is the ability to disseminate your research. And there have been there are many there's a big Chinese RoboCup community. There's been Chinese members on the board of trustees along with us. It's a very international community. It is very cooperative. So the competition is sort of a head fake a little bit. It's getting everybody to have a deadline to get there to try to win a trophy. But as an organization, with it's a very cooperative. We're all sort of trying to move towards this long-term 2050 goal of beating the World Cup champions on a real soccer field, and we will all succeed if any of us get there. Is basically the idea.
There's actually a term in our field called a cooperator, where you're both cooperating and competing.
Okay, thanks very much for your presentation. Are you actually also going to look at what are the differences in the code from the previous competition and now in terms of how the robos change their behavior?
Yeah, so that's actually some of the questions I'll be asking in interviews with folks on these teams is, tell me about your time in the competition in some cases past years. We have members who have competed for years and years since they were undergrads and now graduating grad students. And then we have members who are completely brand new. So seeing how those robots change over time is definitely important. Some of the systems stay the same, so they might have robots they've been competing with for, over time. But then there's also robots that change in the open platform leagues. So you might have a booster robot going against a different robot. That changes. And then, of course, the types of sort of games, if you will, especially in the at-home league, change each year, depending on what the technical committee decides. So you might have storing groceries task one year, but not the next. Or they have a reception task that I know has changed over the years because ultimately they decided, is this a realistic sort of human-robot interaction setting as well? So understanding the nature of those changes and why they change is definitely important. Yeah, thanks for your question.
Hi, Emily. I'm James Howison at the School of Information. You mentioned tacit knowledge. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you might operationalize tacit knowledge in your study?
Yeah, definitely. So I pull from research, I believe it's pronounced Polanyi. And so when we talk about tacit knowledge, what we talk about is knowledge that is hard to explain, but easy to do if you sort of know a lot about it. So oftentimes we talk about people who are so good at something like a sport where they have a hard time articulating how to do it, but they just automatically sort of jump into this mode and do a free throw without even thinking about it or something of that nature, right? So in this case, what I see the overlap of tacit knowledge is these members talking about the fact that you just have to go to RoboCup. Like, you'll just experience it. You know, it's not really something that they can give advice on other than the technical problem that might be happening, but the pressure and the relationships that people actually form at the competition seem to be characterized by this way of knowing that you have to feel in your body, you have to feel when you're talking to people, and can only be experienced sort of while you're there. So as that team member mentioned, you sort of gain scars, as he said. So,
Super. Thank you.
yeah, thank you for your question. Awesome. Thank you, Ken. Yeah. Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it.